Have you ever had a dream that felt more real than being awake? Not the kind you forget 5 minutes after opening your eyes. I mean the kind that stays with you, the kind that makes your heart race even after the sun comes up. I never believed dreams could change a life. Until the night before my wedding, if someone had told me that my late grandmother would save me from the biggest mistake of my life, I would have laughed. But that's exactly what happened. My name is Emily. I was 29 years old, and in less than 12 hours I was supposed to marry the man I believed was my forever. His name was Daniel. Everyone said we were the perfect couple. We had been together for 4 years. He was kind. He was successful. He always knew the right thing to say. At least, that's what I thought. The wedding was planned down to the smallest detail. The flowers had arrived. The guests were already checking into their hotels. My dress was hanging in my childhood bedroom. Everything was ready. Or so I believed. That evening my parents insisted I spend one last night at home. "It's tradition," my mom said with a smile. I didn't argue. There was something comforting about sleeping in the same room where I had grown up. Before going to bed, I opened the small wooden box on my dresser. Inside was my grandmother's wedding ring. She had passed away 3 years earlier. She wasn't just my grandmother. She was my best friend. She raised me while my parents worked long hours. She taught me how to bake. She taught me how to forgive. But more importantly, she taught me to trust my instincts. She used to tell me, "When something feels wrong, don't ignore it just because everyone else says it's right." I smiled as I held her ring. "I wish you were here tomorrow, Grandma," I whispered. "I could really use one of your hugs." A few minutes later, I turned off the light. Outside, the wind gently moved the trees. Everything was peaceful until I fell asleep. Suddenly, I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was standing in my grandmother's old garden. The same roses, the same white fence, the same wooden swing. Everything looked exactly as it had years ago. Then I saw her. She was standing beside the roses, wearing the same blue dress she always wore on Sundays. She looked exactly the way I remembered. She smiled, but her eyes were filled with worry. "Grandma?" I ran toward her. The moment I reached her, she gently held my hands. Her voice was calm, but urgent. "Emily, you don't have much time." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" She looked straight into my eyes. "Cancel your wedding." I froze. "What?" "You must wake up before sunrise. Drive to your mother-in-law's house. Go inside. You'll see everything." I shook my head in confusion. "I don't understand. What am I looking for?" She slowly stepped backward. "The truth. Please, don't be late." The wind suddenly became stronger. The roses began to lose their petals. Everything around me faded into darkness. I reached for her. "Grandma, wait!" Then I woke up. My heart was racing so hard that I could barely breathe. The room was dark. The clock beside my bed read 4:07 a.m. For several minutes, I just sat there. It had felt so real. Every word, every expression, every warning. I kept telling myself it was only a dream, just stress, nothing more. But then, I looked toward my dresser. My grandmother's wedding ring was lying outside the wooden box. I was certain I had placed it inside before going to sleep. A chill ran through my body. For the first time in my life, I began to wonder if my grandmother had truly come to warn me, and without telling anyone, I quietly picked up my car keys. I had one destination before my wedding, my future mother-in-law's house. The roads were almost empty. The sky was still dark, with only a faint line of light beginning to appear on the horizon. Every mile I drove, I kept asking myself the same question. What am I doing? I was about to get married in a few hours. My phone buzzed with messages from my bridesmaids. "Good morning, beautiful. Today's your day. Don't be nervous. Everything will be perfect." I couldn't bring myself to reply. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. The dream wouldn't leave my mind. My grandmother had never been dramatic. Even when she was alive, she spoke softly. She believed the truth didn't need loud words. That made her warning even harder to ignore. After about 20 minutes, I turned onto the quiet street where Daniel's mother, Carol, lived. The neighborhood was peaceful. Every house looked asleep, except one. Carol's kitchen light was on. I frowned. It wasn't even 5 in the morning. Why would she already be awake? I parked a little farther down the street and watched the house. A few minutes later, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out carrying a thick envelope. He looked around before walking to the front door. Carol opened it almost immediately, as if she had been expecting him. She smiled, not the warm smile she always gave me. This one looked secretive. The man handed her the envelope. She quickly tucked it under her arm and glanced toward the street. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. I quietly got out of my car. The morning air felt cold against my face. Keeping close to the hedges, I moved toward the side of the house. One of the kitchen windows was open just enough for voices to drift outside. I wasn't planning to eavesdrop. I just wanted to understand why my grandmother had sent me here. Then I heard Daniel's voice. He was already inside. "She has no idea," he said with a quiet laugh. Carol chuckled. "Of course she doesn't. She trusts you completely." I felt my heartbeat speed up. Daniel sighed. "Once the wedding is over, everything becomes much easier." Carol lowered her voice. "Did she already sign the paperwork?" "Not yet," Daniel replied. "She's signing it after the ceremony. Her lawyer thinks it's just routine estate planning." Estate planning? I had never agreed to anything like that. Carol laughed again. "Your grandfather would be proud. That family lake house will finally belong to us." The words hit me like ice water. The lake house. It wasn't just a vacation home. It had belonged to my grandparents for over 50 years. My grandmother had left it to me in her will because it held every childhood memory we shared. Daniel had always said he loved that place. He talked about raising our future children there. Now I understood why. It had never been about the memories. It had been about ownership. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood. There had to be another explanation. Then I heard something that shattered every remaining doubt. Daniel laughed softly. "I don't even love the house." Carol sounded surprised. "No?" "No," he replied. "I just know how much it's worth." The room fell silent for a second. Then he added words I will never forget. "And honestly, I never would have dated Emily if she hadn't inherited it." My knees almost gave out. The man I loved, the man I trusted, the man waiting for me at the altar, had chosen me because of my grandmother's legacy, not because of me. I covered my mouth to stop myself from making a sound. Tears filled my eyes, but before I could step away, a floorboard creaked beneath my foot. The voices inside stopped. Carol's voice suddenly became sharp. "Did you hear that?" Daniel answered quietly. "Someone's outside." I stood completely still, holding my breath, praying they hadn't seen me. Then, the back door handle slowly began to turn. The back door opened slowly. I had only a second to react. Without thinking, I slipped behind a tall row of hedges just as Daniel stepped outside. He looked around the yard, his eyes scanning every corner. For a moment, I was sure he would find me. My heart pounded so hard I thought he might hear it. He took a few steps toward the driveway, then stopped. The neighborhood was still quiet. A bird sang from a nearby tree. Nothing moved. After another long look, Daniel shook his head. "It was probably a raccoon," he called back into the house. Carol didn't sound convinced. "Make sure." "I already did," he replied. "No one's here." He closed the door. Only when I heard the lock click did I finally breathe again. I leaned against the fence, trying to steady myself. My hands were shaking. Everything I thought I knew about my future had fallen apart in just a few minutes. The man I was about to marry didn't love me. I wasn't his partner. I was his plan. I hurried back to my car and locked the doors. For several minutes, I simply sat there, staring through the windshield. My phone rang. Daniel. I couldn't answer. A second later, another call. Then another. Finally, I picked up. "Hey," I said, forcing my voice to sound normal. "There you are." Daniel laughed. "I've been trying to reach you. Where are you?" I looked toward Carol's house. "I'm just out getting coffee," I lied. "Good," he said. "Big day today." His voice sounded so warm, so caring. If I hadn't heard the conversation myself, I would have believed every word. "I can't wait to marry you," he said. The sentence made my stomach turn. I closed my eyes. "So, you're happy?" I asked. "Of course I am." "You're not hiding anything from me?" There was a brief silence. Then he laughed. "What kind of question is that?" "I don't know." "I just wanted to hear your answer." He smiled through the phone. "Emily, after today, we'll share everything." Those words meant something completely different now. After today. He expected to share everything I owned. We ended the call, but this time, I wasn't crying. I was thinking. Grandma hadn't sent me there just to stop the wedding. She had given me something even more valuable. The truth. And the truth was power. If Daniel believed I knew nothing, then he would walk straight into his own trap. For the first time that morning, I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I had a plan. I drove home, wiped away every tear, and put on my wedding dress as if nothing had happened. When my mother saw me, she smiled with tears in her eyes. "You look beautiful." I hugged her tightly. She whispered, "Your grandmother would be so proud today." I swallowed the lump in my throat. She already is, I thought, just not for the reason anyone imagined. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I made one silent promise. "Daniel, you wanted to embarrass me in front of everyone, but before this day is over, the only person left speechless will be you." The church had never looked more beautiful. White roses lined the aisle. Soft music floated through the room. Friends and family smiled as they found their seats, chatting about the happy couple. To everyone else, it was the perfect wedding day. To me, it was the day the truth would finally come into the light. I stepped out of the bridal room and peeked through the small window in the door. Daniel was already standing at the altar. He looked confident, calm. Every few seconds he smiled at the guests, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. If I hadn't heard what he said that morning, I would have believed he was the happiest groom in the world. My maid of honor, Sarah, adjusted my veil. "You okay?" she asked softly. I smiled. "I'm better than okay." She laughed. That's not the answer I expected. Neither did I, because a few hours earlier I had been ready to cancel everything. Now, I had a different plan. Not revenge born from anger. Justice built on truth. The music changed. The church doors opened. Everyone stood. My father offered his arm. "You ready, sweetheart?" I looked into his eyes. He had spent months helping pay for this wedding. He believed Daniel would take care of me. He had no idea what kind of man was waiting at the altar. I squeezed his hand. "I'm ready." We walked down the aisle. Every eye turned toward me. Some guests wiped away happy tears. Others smiled warmly. Daniel looked at me with the same charming expression that had fooled me for 4 years. He whispered as I reached him, "You look incredible." I simply nodded. No smile, no excitement. He noticed. "You nervous?" he whispered. "A little." "If anyone should be nervous," I replied quietly, "it's the person hiding secrets." For the first time that day, his smile faded, only for a second. Then it returned. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." The officiant welcomed everyone and began the ceremony. His words faded into the background. I wasn't listening. I was watching Daniel, watching every tiny change in his face, every nervous glance, every forced smile. Halfway through the ceremony, the officiant asked the traditional question, "If anyone has reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now." Silence filled the church. Daniel relaxed. He thought we had made it. He reached for my hand. That's when I gently pulled it away. Every guest noticed. A quiet murmur spread through the room. The officiant looked confused. "Miss Carter, is everything all right?" I took a slow breath. "No." The room became completely silent. I turned to face the guests. "My grandmother always told me that truth has a way of finding us." Daniel's expression changed instantly. "Emily," he whispered, "don't." I looked at him calmly. "I visited your mother's house this morning." His face lost all color. Carol, sitting in the front row, gripped the edge of her seat. I continued. "I wasn't looking for answers." "But I found them." Daniel forced a laugh. "Emily, you're upset. Whatever this is, we can talk about it later." I shook my head. "No. I think everyone deserves to hear it now." The church fell into complete silence. Even the musicians stopped moving. Daniel took one step closer. "Emily." His voice was no longer calm, it was desperate. "What exactly do you think you heard?" I looked straight into his eyes. "I heard enough to know that you never loved me." "You only loved what my grandmother left behind." A gasp echoed through the church. Daniel's mother stood abruptly. "That's a lie." I calmly reached into my handbag. "I expected you to say that." Then I slowly pulled out something that made both Daniel and Carol freeze, and for the first time all morning, they looked genuinely afraid. I held up my phone. It looked like an ordinary phone, but to Daniel, it was the end of the story he had spent years creating. His eyes locked on the screen, his confident smile disappeared. Carol whispered, "Daniel?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. I looked at the guests. "I know this is not what anyone expected today," I said calmly. "It isn't what I wanted either. But if I walk away without telling the truth, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering why I stayed silent." The church was so quiet that no one moved. Even the children in the back stopped whispering. I pressed one button. Daniel's voice filled the room. "She has no idea." A few guests looked at each other. Then Carol's voice came through the speakers. "Once the wedding is over," Daniel answered, "everything becomes much easier." The recording continued. Every word, every laugh, every selfish plan. Then came the sentence that changed the room forever. "I never would have dated Emily if she hadn't inherited the lake house." A wave of shocked gasps swept through the church. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Another guest slowly shook his head in disbelief. Daniel stepped toward me. "Turn that off." I calmly lowered the phone. "No. You've controlled the story long enough." He reached for my hand, trying to pull me aside. "Emily, listen to me. That recording doesn't show the whole conversation." I looked at him. "Then tell everyone the part that makes it better." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. There weren't any. His own silence became the answer. Carol stood up, pointing at me. "You planned this." I nodded. "You're right. I planned to protect myself, and I almost didn't." I looked toward the first row where my parents were sitting. My mother was crying quietly. My father wasn't crying. He was staring at Daniel with a look I had never seen before. Not anger, disappointment, the kind that hurts even more. He slowly stood and walked toward me. For a second, I worried he might be embarrassed. Instead, he wrapped his arms around me. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "You had the courage to stop before it was too late." I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. For the first time that day, they weren't tears of heartbreak. They were tears of relief. The officiant gently closed his book. "I believe," he said softly, "today is no longer about a wedding. It's about the truth." No one argued. One by one, guests began leaving their seats, not to congratulate the groom, but to stand beside me. Daniel remained at the altar, completely alone. The perfect image he had worked so hard to build had fallen apart in front of everyone. As I walked toward the church doors, I remembered my grandmother's words, "When something feels wrong, don't ignore it just because everyone else says it's right." I smiled through my tears. She had been right. One last time. And without her warning, I might have spent the rest of my life married to a man who loved an inheritance more than my heart. The end.